Okay, we're looking at how to create some of the pieces for our game, and apparently my last video left a few details out, such as keyframes. So we know how to make some symbols, but let's make some symbols with timelines in them. So what we're going to start off with is ActionScript 3.0. So if you haven't started anything yet, this is from scratch. If you have, then assume that you're just getting your old file and dig in and add some stuff. So the first thing I want to do is make my splash screen. My splash screen I'm going to make with the rectangle tool, and there's some options here. So the purpose of the splash screen, let's take a look at an earlier game. So the purpose of the splash screen is to contain all the sort of card graphics or splash graphics, including the title and the story and the how to play, and then each level graphic. So those are all contained in one single timeline of an object. And once you finish with a level graphic, you click and it's okay, now we're going to play. And look, boom, right? Good times. But the way that works is by having a single object, a splash screen, with a bunch of frames in it. So here's a bunch of frames. One layer contains just this bottom graphic, so this frame, if you will. And then the top graphic, the top layer, contains all the text. And each of them is contained in its own keyframe. Now what I believe I've been negligent in explaining so far is how to create those keyframes. That's what this video is about. So popping back in here to my scratch, got nothing in it file, I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to first set my fill and my stroke. You can do this either in the rectangle tool settings or over here. If I set this button here, it's going to set to black and white. I want to give it a better color here, so I'm just going to pick a color. And if I set this, I probably want to make the saturation of it. Look, this is fully saturated 100%. Let's back that saturation off a little bit. So, as you may know, the saturation, the higher the saturation is, the more visually dominant the piece is. So I'm going to back the saturation off to about 50%. And I'll still have some color. Now, other things I could do here is if I take the rectangle options in the rectangle properties with the rectangle selected, then I can choose to increase the softness of the corners, like this. And you can choose to do that or not, up to you. So this is without the corners, and there's another option here that they'll bend the other way, and that's kind of interesting and fun. Looks like a ticket of some kind. So I'm going to make it this way, and you can choose to do it whatever design you want on this. You could even design this background in Illustrator and import it. So here's the shape I want to use, and I kind of want to have it looking even on each side. So if I know that my stage or my game size is 550 by 400, I might decide to make this thing like 500 by 450. So that way it's kind of even by 4. Oops. Tab over. Oh, there's tab by. And that's locked, so it stays. So if I unlock this, I can change these independent of each other. So 550 by, so it's 500 by 350, I think is what I want. So all I did was subtract 50 from each of the dimensions. So I got this now. I'm going to use the align panel. And right now, it's important to note that I'm still in scene 1. In just a few minutes, we're going to be inside the symbol. Library contains nothing, or maybe you've already done some things, but this is for the splash screen. So I'm going to make this into my splash object. I'm going to right click and choose convert to symbol. It's also in the modify menu, convert to symbol, or you can press F8. So F8 says, let's make a symbol out of this thing. I'm going to call it splash, capital S. Not all caps though, there we go. And I'm going to put the centering point, the registration point in the middle, because it's going to float in the middle of the screen, and the background or the color may be still visible. It's going to be a move clip symbol, that's important, and export for ActionScript. There we go. Now, here's where I lose some students. Some students are going to design in scene 1. No, no, no. You want to design inside the splash symbol. So I delete that from the stage. It'll later be placed there by code and programming. So I open the splash, and now I'm inside scene 1, inside splash. So I'm going to go ahead and add this and keyframe, insert frame, or F5. If I right click here, there's insert frame. You can also find that in insert, timeline, frame, or you can push F5. So all that does is extend this without making any changes. So F5 extends the current frame for more time without making any changes to it. Now we're going to add a layer. Let's actually name this. We'll call this frame. And I'm going to add a layer. So there's a little add layer button down there. Be careful you don't add a layer folder. So the little object right there next to it is that there is layer folder. You want new layer, which I did. So let me bring this back into place here. Let's name this one text. Alright, so I'm going to lock the frame layer just to make sure I don't goof it up. Alright, so I've got it locked there. And now I'm going to add some type. Okay, so I'm going to add my type, and let's see, we'll call the name of this game, what could I call it? I could call it Attackers, go all caps, Attackers from Mars. Now I do want to change this so it's centered. So in the properties panel, when there is text selected, I have text properties like paragraph and character. So I'm going to center it. I'm going to pick, oh, I like that font. Impact is nice. There's some other choices I could pick, and they're visible in here in the font drop down. And I think I'm going to still stick with impact. There's some cooler looking ones out there. Impact is pretty good though. Depending on what your game style is, you could choose a lot of different things. There's this Gaudy Stout. I'm going to go back to impact though. So again, you can pick whatever font you like, but it should be legible, visible, easy to read. And now let me crank up the size a bit more. And I like even numbers, so I'm going to go with like 72. That looks good. So if I click on the arrow tool to select the nothing, it disappears. Why? Because my font color was the same as my background color. It used the same color I had for my fill to build my font. So I just choose this, and let's give it a color. Let's see, blue is opposite orange on the color wheel, I think. I could be wrong. So orange stands out nicely. If I go with orange and then I darken it down, that's going to help a little bit, I think. There we go. And you could also use Peloton, the color scheme designer. So for best results, you should be using Peloton to create your color plan. Now there's a few color schemes in here. This is adjacent colors only. You could go adjacent with a complement. So now here are the colors I could pick from, and if I'm like, those are terrible, why would I use those? Then you can just crank this thing around and work with your saturation and brightness values until you like what you see. And then there's a choice, a few choices for each shade or each piece of the palette that allows us to create more or less intensity, more or less brightness, more visibility, trying to create emphasis on some things and de-emphasizing others. So have an idea of what are the main players and what are the supporting actors in your piece. Alright, so let's get back into our game design. Here we are, and we've got this. Now what I want to use is my align panel to center that. And again, I'm inside Splash 1. So Splash 1 is in Scene 1. Not really actually, because it's only in the library right now, but I want to make sure I'm in the Splash 1 timeline. So I'm going to center this both ways. Set that the way you want to. If you want to right justify it or left justify it to fit your design scheme, that's just fine. And you might drop in here later some objects that represent what the parts are on your game, so it looks like more title. Now, I do need to make more stuff, so here's where we talk about keyframes. So I can right click on this and choose insert keyframe. What that does is you can see two keyframes that are exactly the same. The only reason to create keyframes is to create change. So the reason I did that this way is so I could not have to create another text object. And you could have just done a blank keyframe, which we'll do in a minute. So we're going to take this title and I'm going to reduce the size, and I'm going to use this for my my story object. So there we go, Attackers from Mars. There's this, and I'm going to center this, and I'm going to leave it at the top. So now, lazy, efficient, call it what you will. I'm going to Alt drag this because I don't want to do the text again. It's a little quicker to do it this way. And now I can drag this over if I want to, and I'm going to make this a paragraph, a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to write some stuff in here. This is where we tell the story of what's happening in our game. So the year, let's make this left justified. The year is 2564. Earth, a bunch of stuff. Tell the story about Earth. Earth has been, and do need to enters at some point invaded by previously unknown. I don't know. Tell the story here. And so there we go. So you might tell more, you might tell less. Now, visually speaking, these two things are competing for dominance because this is the same size, the same font. So I'm going to reduce the size of this one a little bit, and it's going to mess up my alignment a little bit on my text. So I'm just going to hit enter here and make this line up a little bit better. So get that looking the way you want it to, and write some story about your game, explain some things. So then there's this. If I go to the next frame, I'm going to do the same thing again. F6, right click, insert keyframe, same thing. And here we're going to have directions, how to play. Probably going to put a capital at the beginning. So always use the conventions of English writing when writing this stuff because it needs to look professional. So move, let's see, use arrow keys to move. And then I might draw some arrow keys there. And I can move this down, Alt drag, Alt shift drag, and I can say use space to shoot. And I probably should include some other instructions on there. For now, keep it brief, and later you can add some stuff in there like what the players look like, or what the bonus objects are, or how the scoring appears, etc. So now I've got that piece in there. Now I'm going to change score a little bit, change direction a little bit here. We've done F6 so far, we've done F5, now we're going to do F7. F7 is insert blank keyframe. So what I'm going to do here is put in my screen for my level. So I'm just going to put the word level here in caps. You can do this however you like. Design is yours, not mine. So I'm going to take this. I should center it this way. And then I'll drag this down, I'll drag. And I'm going to put a number or a word for it in here. Level 1. And I should center that. Boom. And you can put a level title on there if you want to. You can come up with that later. And let's move this so they're both kind of centered. Should look good. Should be sort of centered. So level 1. Now, here's where we get into F6s again. F6 here. And I'm just going to change this by double clicking it and doing 2. And I'm going to go here. F6 and 3. Oops, 3. How about 3? So let's double check to make sure I've got 1, 1, 2. Oops, looks like I didn't do an F6 at one point. Let's change that back to 2. Go to the next frame. F6. Let's change this one to 3. And then probably double check. That's a good idea. 1, 2, 3. So as we add these in here, we're inserting keyframe, changing the type to the next number until we have all those in place. So now that I've got all of the level screens in place, that was fast, wasn't it? What I'm going to do is one last screen or two, and I could even steal one from a previous frame. I don't know. Let's try this. If I here's the thing you can do. If you can alt drag objects, you can also alt drag frames. So I'm going to hold down Alt, grab that frame and drag it forward, and now I've got a copy of the exact contents. And we're just going to change this one. And again, I'm in frame like 14, and this is my game over, or you lose, or who knows what it says here. Game over. Okay, and I can center this if I want to. This way, this way. Looks good. So now I've got a game over screen. You can even make that bigger if you want to. It's your game. Do what you like. Put some stuff in there. Looks great. Okay, so now, again, I should have Attackers from Mars, or whatever my title is. Story, directions, level up to 10, and a game over screen. Now I do have an extra frame at the end here. You might use that later, you might not. Let's just go ahead and call that good. And then that's your splash screen object. Now later we're going to be programming this to work as it should. So again, when we're done, and we're not programming this on this tutorial, it clicks through, and then after the level screen, it's going to go to play. So there's that. Now the one thing we also want to make, one thing we also want to make is a button. So a button is going to help us advance the frames forward. There's other ways to do it, but buttons are nice. So I'm going to draw a button real quick. Got a rectangle, and I'm going to use a bright orange for the fill on this so it's dominant and stands out a little bit. So brighter orange, more saturation. Alright, there's my button shape. And you should think about how big it should be and where it should go. So think about design on this. Select it. I'm going to F8 or right click and choose convert to symbol or modify, convert to symbol, F8. It's now going to be called button 1 or go button, or there's a variety of names you can call it, but make sure we know that the whatever you call it should be showing up in the code later. So I'm going to call this next or go button or button 1. And I'm going to put the registration point in the middle, and I'm going to export fraction script. Okay, now we're going to edit this thing, and as always, I forgot to make it a button. So you may have that happen to you. When you're making the button, make sure that you set it to button instead of remove clip symbol. But if you forget, like I did, choose properties and change the type to button. Here's what that should look like right here. Should be a button symbol. So I goofed. So now, when it's over here, it looks like a button symbol icon right next to it. So now I'm going to choose open the symbol up, and there it is. And I'm going to add some stuff to this. There's a few ways to design this. There's lots of options, but what I'm going to do is the timeline should have up, over, down, and hit. And what I like to do is right click here and insert frame so it extends. If you then double click, notice it selects everything. Again, let's unclick that. Double click, selects everything. And then we can actually just push F6, and everything's got its own keyframe. Now the reason I do that is I want to have a base starting level of exactly how it was when it started. So the overframe, if I select it, if I click the overframe like this and choose the transform panel, I'm going to make sure this is selected or clicked to constrain, and I'm going to set this to 110. So now the over is bigger, and now the down is going to be smaller. This is traditional. It's how we do things in design for a long time. Buttons tend to have some animation to them. And the hit state is how large does it take to activate the button. Now if we want to, you could get weird and make it a little bit larger. And what that does, let's make this 120 just for fun. So now the button, when I drop that button into place and run it, I don't even have to touch the button, and I get close and it says button, button. Alright, so I'm not even on top of the button before it activates. And you can also add text to it, so if we delete this from the main stage, that'll also be placed by code later. But let's open this up and let's add another layer to it. So now we can say, let's just put the word click on there. Slick click, there we go. So, there's an odd typo. So I'm going to make this black type. And I'm going to move it down. That's a little large, so let's shrink it down so it fits there. Let's center it. So everything's about design here, right? Colors is about design, location, position, alignment, all these things are about design. Now I want this thing to also animate with this, so the easiest way to do that is to break it apart. So modify, break apart, now it's a bunch of letters. Modify, break apart one more time, and now it's graphics. So let's do the same thing we did here. So all these frames are selected. F6 to make them all keyframes. And again, we're going to go over, and we'll go to 110. So it's going to match the animation of the main part of the button. And then 90 here. So now we have a button that when we put it on the stage and run it, looks kind of groovy. Now your game definitely should have some other symbols in it. We should be looking for ship or player, whatever you want to call it, shot. So ship, we'll add these other frames later, but just one drawing for now will work just fine. And it could be simple, so you can get onto the programming and design it more later. You should have an enemy, and the enemy is also going to use keyframes so that we have one enemy for every level of the game. So as we go through the game, you have more enemies, and the purpose there is to make it more of a challenge for the player to know what to shoot, because if you have objects dropping in that you're supposed to catch and not shoot, it's hard to discern them from the enemy objects as they drop through. So there's other objects we're going to use later, but again, the enemy, every frame of the enemy should be a different design, and I should have up to 10 of these. So again, I'm going to use F6, and you can use this little button down here called onion skinning, So the onion skinning button is way down there, like this. And it says onion skin when you point to it. So what onion skinning does, it says, let's be able to see what the other frames show. So if I have onion skinning on, I should be able to see what the other frames are. Okay, there we go. So now onion skinning just kind of ghosts, or makes it look ghosty what the other parts are. There we go. So now I've got this other blank frame here. I think that's blank. Nope, it's not. Or maybe I did F6 there. Yeah, I did. So my next picture is going to be, and I've got the onion skinning on to give me a feel for how big it should be. So there's lots of designs you could use for whatever your objects are. Let's use the colors back to black and white, or black and gray. I'm thinking they've been in space for a while, they're going to be a little bit gray. And I'm going to use no curvature. So here's a shape. And that looks kind of silly so far, but if I adjust the shape, the selection tool, the black arrow, you can actually move corners around. But what you might want to use instead is the direct selection, because then you can count your mouse clicks. So it was 1, 2, 3 with a shift, 1, 2, 3 with a shift, and gosh, what could I do here? I could do tons of things. Just working with shapes, Alt drag it over, use the free transform tool to reduce its size, or something like that. So I can use this to punch a hole in the top of it. So let's take the whole thing. Let's center these objects first. Let's center them both this way. And I'm going to take this one and drag it up. So I'm just kind of making up different bizarre and strange shapes to build my ship from. There's this, and there, who knows? That could be a ship, couldn't it? Sure. Have you ever seen a spaceship? Neither have I, so I'm just guessing here. So I keep adding frames, drawing stuff up until I have 10 frames of enemy to work with. Anyway, the main things you need to have is enemy, ship, shot, and the shot is, I build the shot size based on the other sizes of objects. So if I'm drawing this, I want to think how big should that be. So if I draw with my ship or the enemy ship in mind, then I'm like, okay, how big should that really be? There's my space, my size of my object. Looking at the properties, that is like 4.8 pixels wide. So I can make it skinnier if I want. Say 4 by 17. So it's smaller. It should be centered. This is really important in this one. It should be centered. And I put it on top of the registration point so that it will, when I launch it from the player, it's going to launch from their nose to here. So anyway, there's some things to work with. Let me know if you have questions. Peace out.